Welcome back. We continue the build of the bookcase unit. Today it's the turn of the drawers and we're going to use the Incra fence to cut some blind dovetails. If that sounds interesting, stick around. As you can see, I've put the bookcase into position, and did I mention in the last episode, that's heavy, really heavy. But you can see we've done it. It's a good fit, it's exactly where we need to be, and now we can start to look at the drawer units. We're going to use the Incra fence system, and all the drawer units are going to be dovetail construction. To be precise, blind dovetail construction. So if you're not familiar with the Incra fence, go out and check that series now. I am about to release a series on the Incra joint, and what we're going to do, we're going to take each of the joints that the Incra fence can do and go down into that in a little bit of detail. But if you're watching this episode on the day it came out or the weekend just after, that series has not yet started, so there's no context for you to understand what we're going to do as we make the drawers. And for that reason, this episode is going to focus a little bit more than I normally would on the setup of the Incra fence to make the dovetail. There's quite a lot of thinking in using the Incra fence system. So what I've done, I've come up with a cheat sheet that allows me to capture some key information that we need from the various templates, and then just some step-by-step guidelines that walks us through how to do this. And this is going to be one of those things that once you've done it a few times, it becomes second nature. But once you first enter this world of the Incra dovetailing, it's a little bit complicated. And the videos that I've found so far on YouTube or from the training material that comes from Incra themselves is good, but it's not quite good enough in terms of understanding. So you've got to watch it 5, 6, 7 times, play and practice before you can get to a point of proficiency that we need for our work. So I've created a cheat sheet that helps us. These will be discussed in more detail as part of the Incra joint series that we're going to do, and the cheat sheet will be available as a free download on the website www.thewoodgrafter.com. But we'll use it today in anger, and that should give you some practical experience of what we're trying to do. So the first thing we need to do is to measure the drawer openings inside the bookcase, and I've got a table at the top here that just allows me to capture the information, so I'll do that. First measurement is the height of the drawer openings. 161, 161, 161, 161, 161, 161, 161, and 161. You've got to love precision in your work, haven't you? The next thing is to measure the drawer openings. Let's do that. Drawer 1 is 474. Drawer 2 is 637. Drawer 3, 636. And drawer 4 is 475. And finally, how deep does the drawer need to be? That's 250, 250, 250, 250, 250, 250, 250, and 250. However, I don't want the back of the drawers banging on the back of the cabinet when they're closed, so I'm going to reduce that down away from 250 and make the overall depth somewhere around about 245. So there you have it. I now have my first series of measurements. Now the next thing I want to look at is which dovetail template do I want to use. Now think about that. The dovetails are going to be on the end panels where they meet the front panels. So they're going to be on the edge grain of the board, so therefore they're dictated by the height of this opening. And we know, because we've just measured it, that the height of the opening is 161 millimeters. So we need to find a template in the Incra system that gives us dovetails that look good on 161 millimeters of material. This is the template book that comes with the Incra system, and the reason it's so large is it has full-size replicas of the joints that we can make on the system. So we need to work out which one we are going to use. There are a number of sections inside this book, and they start with the box joint template, the metric box joint template. It also comes with imperial dimensions if that's what you're into, and in Europe if you buy the metric version it comes with this metric version as well. We're not interested in box joints, we're interested in dovetails. So I'll skip the entire section until I get to my metric dovetail joints. You can see underneath each of the templates there's some information that's specific to that particular template. And the first thing I want to check is the approximate stock thickness. These templates will do both through and half blind dovetails. So I'm doing a half blind dovetail, so this template works best using a stock of 8 to 10 millimeters. This template works best with a stock of 8 to 10 millimeters. This template, template C, works best with a stock of 10 to 14 millimeters. So obviously our material is 18 millimeters thick. So I want to find the templates that work best with 18 millimeter stock. So I simply flick through, and my templates start at template F. So I have a choice of template F, template G, template H, template I, and template J, and that's it. So I've now narrowed that complex decision down to a handful of templates. So we know that the stock's going to be somewhere around about 161 millimeters. So that is going to be the thickness of our drawers. So that's the area that the templates need to fit into. The grey area on the template are where the wood will be. B, the top one, are the sockets, and A, the bottom one, are the tails. So when you're doing dovetails, you always want a half pin, as it's called, either side. What that means is you want some of this material either side of your joint. So if I put 160 against this, you can see, even though I'll have a half pin here on this side of 160, I'm into free space. So J isn't really that good for me. If I now line up on template I, you can see it's a little bit better, because now I've got material here on the left hand side and material here on the right hand side, but that is way too little material, and that will make for a very weak joint, so we'll exclude I. Now this one looks quite good, because we're going to have all that material between my thumbs on that joint. So H is a possibility. So that one comes down to, do I like the aesthetics of that joint? I don't know. Let's see if there's anything better. But H is a possibility. I then come down and look at the next available one, 18mm stock, template G, and I'm now lining up 160. Oh, then that's not bad. And that would look quite nice, because we've got a half pin on either side, and then I've got these nice big joints, and that would give me quite a good traditional look. So H is okay, G looks good. Let's try F. So again, lining up my 160 on the F. Now look at that. That looks pretty perfect to me. So my 160 lines up nicely between those two joints. I've got a half pin here, so lots of material, and I've got a nice array of joints, and that's going to look quite pretty. So we have a choice of 3 templates, template F, template G, and template H. So the templates we've chosen, F, G, or H, give me a 160 in the center of the pins, and that'll give me a little bit of maneuverability when we come to fit the drawers. I like F, so I'm going to work with template F to cut my dovetails. The next thing is, I need to find template F. So here's my template F, and hopefully you can see that at the end here it says MDOVF, MDOVF, and this here is a picture of the template. So this is actually that template there. Oopsie daisy. And you'll also see that each template has a number on it, and that's a unique number. So this is template 13, MDOF, and you can just check that by lying this side to side. And now you can start to see how this template actually works. On the template there's a set of red lines called A, and a set of blue lines called B. And we know, because we can see it, B are the sockets and A are the dovetails. So when I line that up, you can see that the A's are actually in the center points of the area we want to cut out. Makes sense? And when you line up the B's, the blue pieces, you can see that that's in the center point that we want to cut out. And that's exactly how the template works. You use the Incra fence to match up that line, the red lines or the blue lines, and it cuts out the space between, either the space between the tails or the space between the sockets, and then it fits together. And that's so simple once you understand that, that you think, yeah, I get it now, I can see where the accuracy is coming in. So that's the template that we're going to use. So now we've identified the template and we understand it a little bit more, there's some information that we need to capture. On our cheat sheet, we've created a list of the information we either need to capture or we need to calculate. The first one is a template name. So we know that we're using number 13, MDOVF. MDOV, metric dovetail template F. I now want to find the approximate depth of cut. If you look at the information underneath the template, you can see it clearly says that the approximate depth of cut is 11 millimeters. So the approximate depth of cut is 11 millimeters. The next thing is, what's the recommended spacing for the depth of cut? The spacing to set the depth of cut is 20 millimeters. And that doesn't matter whether you're doing blind dovetails or through dovetails, it's exactly the same information that you need to capture. We now need to understand the suggested center. The suggested center cut is 11A, and what that's referring to is the reference point on the template that you center around, and that's that point there, 11A. It's not critical, and you can change that, but let's capture it anyway and see how we get on. 11A. The next thing is, what's my suggested rebate width? Now the difference between using the Incra jig as opposed to hand cutting these, or as opposed using another type of dovetailing jig, is that you need to make an additional cut, and that's a dovetail shell rebate on the back of your panel, and you need that, otherwise the joint won't fit together. And we'll look at that a little bit more as we come to assemble the joint, and then it becomes clear and you go, ah, yes, yes. The approximate rebate or rabbet width is 6 millimeters. Suggested rebate width is 6 millimeters. And then finally, which dovetailing bit should we be using? Well, it tells us that as well. The bit type is the 1/2 inch 14-degree dovetailing bit. So we make a note of that, 1/2 inch 14 degree. Now you may have noticed that that dovetail bit is in 1/2 inch, it's in imperial. Now even though the Incra system comes in a metric system in the UK, for some reason the dovetail bits inside that kit are quoted imperial. Now to make it even more confusing, the box tail bits, the straight cuts, are quoted in millimeters. So we have one of those discrepancies in the conversion for the imperial Incra kit when it was first designed to its conversion to metric, but that's okay. Whiteside make an aftermarket kit that gives you the most frequently used bits that you need with the Incra system, and the dovetail bits come in imperial and the box bits come in metric. So I bought the kit that lines up with the details that are given to me against the templates, and that's just to make my life easier, because I don't know about you, but converting degrees and inches on a router bit into metric on the fly as I'm trying to work out the template just seemed a complexity I didn't really want to get along with. So inside my kit, I know we're looking for the 1/2 inch 14-degree router bit, which is this one here. Now the final thing I want to do is to measure the draw height, and I take that measurement from the center points of the sockets on the chosen template. Think about that a little bit. We know that the distance for our draw height is actually 161 millimeters. But if we measure the center point between the sockets using the little indicators on line B, the nearest measurement to 161 is actually 160. Now in theory, that difference between 161, which is the as measured height, and the 160 as defined by the template height, gives me a millimeter of clearance for those draws, and that should be enough to make sure that those draws fit smoothly into the draw openings. If that feels a little bit tight when we come to fit it, we will use a hand tool, a plane, just to bring that down a little bit to give us the perfect fit. So I know that the height of my material is going to be 160 millimeters. And with all that now worked out, we can finally go to the router table and start to set up the cut. For the next step, i.e. setting the depth of the router bit in the table, I need some spare stock. The stock, it doesn't matter what size it is, but it's got to be the same thickness as the material we're going to use on the final cut. In our case, the 18mm pine board. I've just used a TS55 to 4 square these pieces of material, so I know that these are square all the way round. With that done, we can set up for the test cut on the router table. I fitted our 1/2 inch 14-degree bit into the router, and now I want to set this to the approximate depth of cut for setting up. And remember, we've noted the approximate depth of cut was 11mm. Use our digital calipers. We'll zero those down, and then we'll use this to set that 11mm. I'm going to leave it ever so slightly shy of 11mm, and that's so we can creep up on the joint as always. We now want to center this bit into the fence. What I mean by that is the center point of that bit, which is about there, has to be lined up with the front edge of the fence. Now that's not critical at this point, so we can just eyeball it about there. I'm not overly worried about that. This is purely to get the depth, and this is not about aligning the fence up to make the actual joints. I'm now just going to take the blue tape measure and just give myself a 0 point on the crosshair, which is there. So I now know that when 0 is on here, my center point of the router bit is here. So I can move this, bring it back into that 0 position, lock it down, and that's returned to 0, and that's what we're looking for. The next thing is we clamp the 2 pieces of wood to our right-angled Incra fence, and that will allow us to go ahead and make the cut. The recommended way for doing this is bring this back to the edge, use the middle screw on the right-angled fence just to hold that into position. That's a simple lock that just stops it moving backwards and forwards, and then clamp this to the table. Once you've got that clamped, we can then drop the wood into position, making sure that it's flat against this surface and the edges are flat against the fence itself. Drop a wooden clamp on there just to hold it into place. They recommend wooden clamps because it gives you a greater clamping area over this material, making sure that everything stays perfectly into place. And this is quite a precision cut, so who am I to argue? Once that's done, I can take away my clamp. With everything clamped into position, we're now ready to go ahead and make the first cut. Don't want to be putting loads of pressure down on here, you don't want to put in loads of pressure into the fence. The way you've clamped this up with the wooden clamp, that's what you need. So you now are nothing more than a passenger, and if you try and fight this and push it, you will find the joints will come out incorrectly. That's our first cut made. Now remember, there was another measurement, 20mm, that we took from the template itself, and that was the recommended spacing for depth of cut. So we now want to move the fence backwards by 20mm. I'm going to come back to 20mm on my crosshair, lock that into position, and now I make the second cut. I can then take my clamp away, and you can see I've ended up with 2 dovetails. They should now slide together. Now what you're looking for is a perfect fit with no gaps, and you can see here that I can pull this backwards and forward. Although it looks nice, that joint is actually too loose. Now remember, we didn't set this to the full 11mm, so we now want to raise this up a little bit, then we do another test cut, and we keep doing that till this is a perfect joint. Now that has now made a nice tight joint, and there is no wriggle room inside that joint. So this is now set to the right height. Once that's done, we never move this again through the entire procedure. Final thing, I just want to measure this to make sure I've got the height recorded. So I'm zeroing the calipers, and that's giving me a distance of 11.33 millimeters. So that's more or less, for our sensor purposes, 11 millimeters. So I'm just going to mark that here. Now obviously we're making a blind dovetail, and that means there's a bit of meat left over on the front board and the back board to allow for that blind dovetail. That's why this 11 millimeter mark is so important. Now we know that our stock is 18 millimeters, so 18 minus 11 equals 7 millimeters. So now I know the thickness of the material on the outside of the dovetail socket, I now can work out the overall length of my drawer sides. We know the opening is 2, 4, 5. I now take 7 millimeters for the material on the front panel and 7 millimeters the material on the back panel, 14 millimeters, from 245. So 245 minus 7 is 231 millimeters. Round numbers, we'll call this 230 millimeters. Now the table is set up and ready for use, so we can now go ahead and prepare the material. First thing is, I'm going to rip all the material down to the 160 millimeter dimension that we calculated here. I'm going to cross cut the drawer fronts and the drawer backs to this line here, the width of the drawer opening, and I'm just going to round that down a little bit because I don't want it too tight. So we'll take a couple of millimeters off those and cut that to length, and then I can cut all the sides for all my drawers to the 230 millimeter mark that we worked here, and then all these drawers are going to work, the dovetails will work, and they'll all fit in the openings. You've seen me rip material many times, so I won't video that bit. I'm going to go ahead now and get all the stock down to those sizes we've just spoken about, then we'll come in and we'll actually make the dovetails. That's all our sides and fronts and backs cut, and I've just laid out on the bench here the material for drawer 2, so that's the one we'll make first for no apparent reason that it was in my hand. This is the front of the drawer, this is the back of the drawer, the right hand side of the drawer and the left hand side of the drawer. So these are going to be the tail pieces, or A cuts on our Incra system, and I find it's just worthwhile just marking that A and A. So I now know that the A are the A cuts, and also where the A is, that's the outside of my drawer. And similarly on this one, B, and on the outside edge, B. I now know they're my B cuts, and the B is the outside edge. Now the next job is we need to center the router bit. Not zero it like we did last time, but center it. And for that we use a piece of scrap wood from the bits that we've just cut. So it's now got to be the same width and the same thickness as the material that's going to make our drawer sides. So I just saved the bits that came off as I cross-cut to the length that I'd ripped. I'm just going to find the center of this piece of wood just using the usual cross method. So go from corner to corner, make a mark, from corner to corner, make a mark, and then where they cross, in theory, is the centre of the material. So the centre of the material is round about there, and it's not going to be precise, and I've just continued that mark on the top surface here so you can see it. I'm now going to line that mark up more or less in the centre of that router bit and just bring the fence in like so. I'm going to make a cut in this material, spin the board round and make a second cut in that material, and then I can use that groove inside to do the final setting. Spin it round. So you can now see that there's a wider gap on this side of the bit as there is on this side of the bit. So I want to move the fence in this direction, and I'll use the incremental adjustment and just move that bit by bit until that router bit is centered. And I'm looking for an equal amount on either side of that router bit, and that looks pretty good to me. If you remember, when we took the information from the template, there was a thing called the center point, and in our case that was 11A. That's signifying this 11A here on the template. I now want to insert the template into the Incra fence and line up 11A underneath the crosshair. And that's that there. I've now got my fence centered against my stock size, and I've got the center of my template within the crosshairs of the Incra fence. And that's all I need to go ahead now and make my dovetail cuts. So the first cut I'm going to make is a dovetail shaped rebate on the back of the board. So we have a letter A indicating that's my outside face, so this is the inside face, the one without the mark on it. And I want to cut a dovetail shaped rebate down that board. And we'll look at why we're doing that as we come to fit the joint together. We have a suggested rebate width of 6 millimeters. This dovetail has got to be 6 millimeters deep. I don't want to take all of the 6 millimeters in the first pass. I'm going to take a very, very shallow pass, a scoring cut, almost as if a marking knife has defined that shoulder, and then I'm going to move incrementally to the 6 millimeters. To do that, I'm going to zero this router bit in to the front of the face and just lock that into position. And then, using the incremental adjuster, I'm just going to back that away by a small amount, lock it into place. I then use this blue rule and I zero that in on the crosshair so I can find that exact position again. Working on the back of the material, I now want to take shallow passes across this until I get to that 6 millimeter deep rebate we're looking for. So that's defined a dovetail shaped rebate across the board at 6 millimeters deep, and the inside shoulder is pretty clean. I want to set my fence back to 0, drop on my right angled fence, and I want to clamp my material face sides together so the rebates are facing away from each other. Lightly clamp the fence into position and put your stock so it's flat against this fence here and it's all flush against the fence at the front, and clamp that into position with your wooden clamps. We're now going to make a scoring pass here the same way they did before, and then I'm going to move the fence back to the first A position is in my crosshair. I'm now going to move to the second A position on my fence. Next A position. Flip the boards end for end and repeat. And what you end up with is a whole host of rather neat looking dovetails. With the dovetails cut, it's now time to cut the sockets. So we're going to bring up the fence to that router bit, and I just want to find the B position on this scale at the back that leaves this on the outside of the fence. So that router bit is not covered up in any way, shape or form by the fence. Once I get to that position, lock it in, and that's going to be my first cut. I want to set the shop stop so that my fence is just on the outside of the router bit. So I drop the reference fence all the way down and I just bring it up so it's just touching the bit, and then I can lock this in here, and now I can lift up my fence so it's above my router bit but it's below the edge of the board, which is round about there. With my face up, because I want to cut the sockets into the back of the board, it's simply a matter of making the first cut slide into the next B position, the second cut, and so on and so forth till we go right across the board. Now we end up with the sockets cut in here. It may not show up on the camera, but can you see how these are rounded here at the bottom and they're also sloping down inside? And if you think about the tool that we use to cut that, a dovetail router bit that's spinning, you can understand that profile. So that dovetail rebate that we made on the tailboard slots down into that socket, giving us a firm fit. On the outside it looks like a traditional dovetail, on the inside it's a very, very different type of joint, but equally strong and looks as good. We should be able to assemble this joint with hand pressure only. We shouldn't need to be whacking this hard with a hammer. I just want to push this down so it seats properly. Now you can see the joint coming together. Nice, neat, tidy, tight joint. But these dovetails are slightly proud of this end grain here. So I want to move this Incra fence back by only about 1 stop. And now very carefully just move this back by 1 notch. And then tighten that up again. And now I want to come in and recut these sockets, and that'll make them just 0.1mm deeper, and that should be a perfect fit. So we go back to our start point and recut all of these sockets. Now with everything batched out, we can go ahead and we can assemble the drawer unit. There we have it, our drawer made with blind dovetails. I don't know about you, but I think that's come out really, really, really well. And the final test is, does it fit? Did our measurements work out? And it doesn't get much better than that. A perfect fitting drawer with beautiful blind dovetails. I'll batch out the other 3, and then next time we come together we'll put the drawer bottoms in place and do the raised panels for the drawer fronts. See you next time.